Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 4, Decision Making Institutions. And our topic is Parliamentary Committees. The Parliament has been making use of consultative committees to assist each member. The consultative committee meetings were called whenever the minister thought it fit. They did not have their independent operations. Thus, the foreign minister called the meeting to discuss or clarify an already announced policy. No new issues were taken up in the consultative committee. During Nehru's time, since he himself was the Minister of External Affairs, he used the consultative committee as a sounding body or a debating society. But under Indira Gandhi, initially the Consultative Committee on External Affairs was called to meet more often. But once she consolidated her power after 1971 general elections, she did not pay much importance to the Consultative Committee on External Affairs. One proof of that is the complete lack of discussion on the Indo Soviet Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation in 1971. There was no consultative committee meeting either before signing it or after signing through the treaty proposal was with Mrs. Gandhi for some years. Similarly, the Shimla Agreement was reached on 2nd July 1972 and was ratified by India on 28th July the same year. But Bandyopadhyay points that consultative committee met once on 3rd July after the agreement had been reached and again on 28th August, 1 month after the agreement had ratified. And on neither of these two occasions was the Shimla Agreement even specifically mentioned on the agenda. But there have been standing committees of parliament with statutory powers like Estimates Committee, Public Accounts Committee, and Public Assurance Committee. These committees can and do examine the issues relating to the working of foreign policy and defense. Thus, for instance, the Estimates Committee in 1976-77 under the chairmanship of Atal Bihari Vajpayee examined the working of embassies abroad. Similarly, other committees like Public Accounts Committee and Public Assurance Committee can examine accounts of the agencies implementing foreign affairs or the assurances given on the floor of both the houses of parliament. However, for many years in the 1970s and the 1980s, some foreign policy scholars suggested the need to establish standing committees to discuss foreign affairs and defense. But amongst the political class, the opinion was that the parliamentary committee system is not attuned to parliamentary government, but to the presidential system as in the US. But because of the sustained lobbying by some of the foreign policy experts, the government finally decided to constitute parliamentary committees on Foreign Affairs and Defense. These were finally established in 1991. The role of the parliament in the making of foreign policy is changing somewhat gradually ever since the establishment of parliamentary committees in the area of foreign affairs and defense in 1991. These are known as select committees. They are not advisory committees or consultative committees as referred earlier. These committees respectively have the task of scrutinizing the budget of the concerned departments like MEA and Defense. After the budget is presented in the House, normally Lok Sabha is adjourned. After a month, the Parliament meets again to consider the budget. Equally important is the fact that Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Affairs and also Defense study issues which the Parliament considers important, submits its report to the Parliament and Executive. The executive branch is supposed to submit an action taken report to the Parliament. Thus, for instance, the Standing Committee on the Defense Department has been active in raising important security issues and seek clarifications from the government. Thus, for instance, Parliamentary Committee on Defense in 1995 said, despite warming relations with China, China is and is likely to remain the primary security challenge to India in the medium and long term. On the basis of the working of the parliamentary committees, it can be concluded that there is a need to strengthen the working of these committees. One reform that could be introduced is to provide the permanent staff to these committees drawn from the regular IFS officials in the middle level. These staff members can study the issues coming under the discussion in the committee and the parliament. Another possibility is that political parties, in a conscious way, should encourage more and more retired military and foreign service officials to join politics and enter parliament. Their in service knowledge could be of great help to the parliament as an institution to critically assess every issue involved in the foreign affairs of the country. These committees are definitely improving the role of parliament in foreign or security policy making, but their role needs to be strengthened in foreign policy making. Two brief suggestions can be made in this regard. One, to increase the functions they perform, and second, give these committees a skeleton of permanent expert staff so that the MPs can effectively perform their roles in these committees. Now let us have a look at the summary. It is the domestic needs which decide the broad contour of the foreign policy decisions. In the foreign policy making, political representatives of the people have ultimate control over the foreign policy decisions. But in the Indian democracy, the politically chosen ministers, with the aid and advice of the foreign service officers, do much of the policy making. In this unit, we have analyzed the position of such important institutions as the Ministry of External Affairs, comprising several senior and junior officers handling various sections and divisions dealing with the different countries, regions, and organizations. At the bureaucratic level, the MEA is headed by the foreign secretariats, whose recommendations are normally accepted by the Minister of External Affairs, who is the political chief of the MEA. The Cabinet Committee on Security, comprising select senior ministers and headed by the Prime Minister, clears policy decisions before they are approved by the Union Cabinet. The National Security Council and its advisory board, as well as the Prime Minister's Office PMO, are other important institutions that give their inputs in policy making process. Parliament represents the people and had final words in the days when the foreign policy has been democratized and is no more secretly formulated by the Foreign Office. As India grows in power, there is a need to improve policy making mechanisms. Equally true is to streamline control of the parliament through the parliamentary committees on foreign affairs and defense. Here we wind up this lecture and we have come to the end of the unit. Thank you so much for your attention.